The massive, towering structures of the United Galactic Council were filled with the hum of anticipation, a heavy silence hanging over the assembly as the final vote loomed. It was a decision that would determine the future of the galaxy, one that could either unite the scattered star systems or crush them under the weight of a single, oppressive order. Humans had only recently joined the Council, and though their arrival had sparked curiosity, many of the ancient alien races still viewed them as a relatively primitive species, not quite worthy of their seat at the table. The meeting was scheduled in the Grand Hall, a place where trillions of beings from different corners of the universe would stand united well, at least on the surface. The Council had long been a beacon of peace, a way to ensure that every species, no matter how small, could have a voice. But that day, something had shifted. The Council had proposed a sweeping new initiative, one that would consolidate power under a single governing body. The goal was to streamline decision-making, remove barriers between races, and create a unified galactic government. On the surface, it sounded noble, but the reality was far darker. The plan would dissolve the sovereignty of hundreds of planets, effectively reducing them to little more than pawns in the game of galactic politics. It was a move that, if passed, would have turned the United Galactic Council from a cooperative organization into a dictatorial regime, controlled by the oldest and most powerful species. Many smaller races, those with fewer resources and less influence, would be left with little more than scraps. They would lose their ability to govern themselves, forced to follow orders from the powerful factions that held the majority in the Council. And though it was packaged as a step forward for galactic unity, the truth was clear: it would be a tool for control. When the vote was called, the representatives of each species stood ready. The massive chambers, lined with shimmering holographic screens, were filled with thousands of representatives. Each race had their delegates, some sitting comfortably in their seats, while others looked tense and uneasy. Humans, however, stood apart from the rest. For them, this vote was more than a simple matter of politics. It was the core of their identity, the right to self-determination, the very thing they had fought so hard for in their own history. Humanity had barely been a part of the galactic scene for a few hundred years, but in that time, they had already earned a reputation for resilience. Their history of survival, their unyielding spirit in the face of seemingly impossible odds, had made them both respected and feared. But they were also independent, perhaps too independent for some of the other species. They did not easily bend to authority, especially when it came at the cost of their freedom. And so, as the votes began to be cast, it became clear that humans would not go along with the Council's plan. They would not give up their autonomy, their ability to make their own choices, no matter the cost. The human representative, a sharp-eyed diplomat named Marcus Cade, stood tall before the assembly. His calm demeanor was in stark contrast to the storm brewing in the hall. He spoke clearly, his voice steady but laced with a quiet intensity. "We refuse to be part of a government that seeks to crush the individual spirit of every species under its heel. We will not vote for this proposal. We will not surrender our freedom to a centralized power. Humanity stands for liberty and choice, not for a future where we are all controlled by an elite few." His words rang out, echoing across the chamber, and for a moment there was silence. The reactions were swift and varied. Representatives from the smaller races, those who had long struggled under the Council's decisions, began to murmur in agreement. Their eyes turned to the human delegation, as if seeing them for the first time not just as another species at the table, but as a symbol of resistance, of strength. But among the ancient races, the ones who had held power for eons, there was nothing but scorn. The Prathar, a massive, insectoid race with a complex hive mind, hissed in disgust. The Iris, a telepathic species who valued unity above all else, exchanged cold, calculating glances. Even the Zanari, the most peaceful of the Council's members, seemed troubled by the human stance. They were afraid that humanity's rejection of the vote might inspire others to do the same, to challenge the very structure of the Council. The Council leader, a tall and imposing figure from the ancient NR race, raised a hand for silence. His face was expressionless, but the weight of his centuries of power was evident in the way he carried himself. "This is a vote for the survival of the galaxy as we know it," he said, his voice booming and authoritative. Without unity, without structure, this galaxy will fall into chaos. You will all see in time that this is the only path forward. Do not let the humans lead you astray." His words carried a chilling finality, but as he spoke, there was something else in the air, something shifting. A tension, a crack in the unity the Council had so long prided itself on. The vote was cast. One by one, the species in the room voiced their decision. The majority of the Council's members, the ones who had long held the reins of power, voted in favor of the proposal. The room was filled with murmurs of approval, but there was something hollow about it. Even as the final tally was read aloud, it was clear that not all voices were united. The Iris and Prothar, though powerful, had voted in opposition to humanity, while a few smaller factions had joined the humans in their defiance. As the final vote was announced, the tension in the room reached a boiling point. The proposal had passed. The galaxy's future had been decided, and yet, in the shadows, a new fire had been lit. Humanity had done the unthinkable. They had stood up to the Council, not as mere rebels, but as equals worthy of respect and willing to fight for their place in the galaxy. Marcus Cade stood in the middle of the chamber, the weight of his decision heavy upon him. "We will leave," he declared, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "We will not be part of a system that values control over freedom. Humanity's future lies in our hands, not in the hands of those who wish to dictate our fate." And with that, the humans walked out. The Council had won the vote, but it was clear that they had lost something far more important, the belief that they could control everything. And humanity, for better or for worse, had just taken its first steps toward reshaping the galaxy. The storm was coming, and no one knew how it would end. In the weeks that followed humanity's dramatic exit from the Galactic Council, the galaxy began to stir with a strange unease. The once imposing unity of the Council was now fractured, and though its leaders tried to maintain a facade of order, cracks were beginning to show. The passing of the initiative to consolidate power under a single governing body was supposed to bring stability, but what had truly emerged was chaos. In a galaxy of trillions, the ripple effect of humanity's decision was far more significant than anyone had anticipated. As humanity withdrew from the Council, they didn't just walk away, they sent a message. A message that their spirit of independence was unbreakable, and that they would not bow to any system that threatened their freedom. But what they didn't know was that their defiance would set off a chain of events that none of them could have predicted. The Council, for all its grandeur and age, was not invincible. The decision to remove humanity from its ranks did not sit well with every species, especially those who had long struggled under the dominance of the more powerful factions. Species that had been too afraid to speak out before now began to question the very foundation of the Council. As the first tremors of rebellion spread, the smaller factions, the once silenced voices, began to make themselves heard. Quiet whispers of discontent turned into louder protests. The unified front the Council had long presented was beginning to crumble. Species who had once been content to follow the Council's dictates now began to doubt its intentions. While the Council struggled to maintain control, humanity retreated into the safety of its borders. They were cautious, aware that the galaxy had become a far more dangerous place for them. News of skirmishes along the galactic trade routes reached Earth, and though these were attributed to pirate raids and isolated conflicts, it was clear to the humans that something darker was brewing. They were no longer seen as simply a new, energetic species, they were becoming a threat, and with that label came dangers they hadn't anticipated. Back on Earth, the mood was a mixture of frustration and determination. While the politicians and diplomats had dealt their blow, it was the people, the citizens of the Human Federation, who felt the real impact. The government began to fortify its borders, building up defenses and preparing for the worst. Earth, which had once stood as a beacon of hope and progress, now felt more like a fortress. The idea of an isolated humanity, cut off from the rest of the galaxy, was taking root. But it wasn't all bleak. Humanity had always adapted. They had survived in their own hostile world, facing constant challenges, and now they would do the same in the galaxy. They had technology, ingenuity, and an unshakable belief in their right to chart their own path. Yet something was missing. The Human Federation's leaders realized that without the alliances they had forged through the Council, they were vulnerable. Alone, they would be easy targets for the powerful species that still controlled the majority of the galaxy. It was a harsh truth, one that gnawed at the back of their minds. Humanity had the strength to defend themselves, but without allies, they could not hope to face down the full wrath of the Council. This realization birthed a new plan. Humanity would not remain passive. They would take action, not through brute force alone, but through diplomacy, strategy, and a careful cultivation of alliances with the discontented factions of the galaxy. It was time to offer those who opposed the Council's growing power something they couldn't ignore, a chance to stand alongside the humans in the fight for freedom. The first step was Captain Adrienne Hawke, a decorated war hero known for her brilliant military tactics and no-nonsense attitude. She'd been serving as an officer in the Human Federation's defense forces when the Council's initiative had passed. But it wasn't just her military expertise that had gained her respect, it was her ability to inspire those around her, to rally people to a cause, even when the odds seemed impossible. Now, she stood at the forefront of humanity's effort to rebuild its place in the galaxy. Hawke knew that humanity could not afford to wait for the galaxy to come to them. She began reaching out to the smaller, less powerful factions, those who had been ignored by the Council or had always been too weak to stand up for themselves. These were the races who had watched humanity's defiance with a mix of awe and hope. They had been subjugated for too long by the Council's overreach, and now they saw an opportunity. Humanity had stood up for its own, and in doing so, they had unwittingly lit a fire in the hearts of the oppressed. The first alliance to form was with the Exaren, a race of intelligent, amphibious beings who had long been treated as second-class citizens by the Council. The Exaren had their own grievances. They were a peaceful species, yet their resources had been exploited by the Council's higher powers for centuries. When Captain Hawke sent a message, offering them a chance to join a new, more equitable galactic order, the Exaren responded. They had been waiting for someone to lead them, someone to show them that they did not have to live in the shadow of the Council's tyranny. But the Exaren were just the beginning. As word spread of this new alliance, others began to follow. The Melkorians, a once pacifist race known for their advanced medical technologies, joined the cause, recognizing that their future was uncertain under the Council's rule. Then came the Vekari, a nomadic species of traders and diplomats who had been pushed to the edge of the galaxy by the Council's expansionist policies. They too saw an opportunity, and they too pledged their support to humanity. However, not every species was so easily swayed. The Council, desperate to maintain its hold over the galaxy, began to crack down on these emerging alliances. It wasn't enough to push humanity out. Now, they had to stop any potential rebellions from gaining momentum. Stealth ships, previously used for diplomacy and trade, now became instruments of surveillance. Every communication, every meeting was under watch. The Council could not allow the seeds of rebellion to take root. But what they didn't understand was this: humanity wasn't afraid of a fight. They had faced adversity on their own planet and had come out stronger every time. The galaxy was vast, and they were only one species, but they had a powerful weapon unity. And the spark they had ignited had already spread beyond their control. The galaxy was changing, whether the Council wanted it or not. A quiet sense of urgency began to fill the hearts of humanity's leaders. They knew that time was running out. If they didn't act quickly, the chance to forge lasting alliances would slip away. The future of the galaxy was uncertain, but one thing was clear: humanity had set the stage for a new chapter in the galaxy's history. And no one knew what would happen next. The future was as fragile as it was uncertain, and the only thing that could be predicted was that it would be a fight for survival. The moment that humanity had feared and the galaxy had anticipated finally arrived. After months of political maneuvering, secret meetings, and fragile alliances, the storm that had been brewing since humanity's departure from the Galactic Council came crashing down with brutal force. The Council, unwilling to let the spark of rebellion spread further, had decided to act. With the support of the most powerful species in the galaxy, they launched a full-scale assault on the human territories, hoping to crush their newfound alliances and send a clear message to anyone else thinking of challenging the established order. But what the Council didn't realize was that they had underestimated humanity in the worst way possible. It began with a sudden strike, an attack on Earth's outer defenses that no one had seen coming. Massive fleets of warships, led by the Council's most powerful races, descended on the human homeworld. It was a coordinated assault, designed to break through the human defenses with overwhelming force. The Prothar, with their vast, insectoid fleets, were the first to make their move. Their ships, massive and capable of devastating entire fleets with a single strike, cut through space like an unstoppable wave. Behind them, the Zanari and the Iris followed, their ships sleek and fast, meant for precision attacks, each one a threat in its own right. The Council had chosen the perfect time. Humanity's alliances were still fragile, and their defenses, though formidable, were not yet fully prepared for such an onslaught. But they had one thing the Council had failed to anticipate: humanity's ability to adapt quickly. Captain Adrienne Hawk, the woman who had become the face of human resistance, was not one to be caught off guard. Even as the first waves of enemy ships arrived, she had already set her plans into motion. Earth's outer defenses, designed for planetary security, were activated with a speed that shocked even the most experienced commanders. Powerful electromagnetic pulses fired from hidden platforms in the atmosphere, creating temporary blind spots for the attacking fleets. The Council's ships were temporarily blinded, their sensors malfunctioning as their systems were overwhelmed by the human tech they had underestimated. But that was just the beginning. While the enemy fleets scrambled to regain control, humanity's own ships, built with the best of human ingenuity, began to emerge from their hidden locations. The Federation had learned the lesson of secrecy long ago. Nothing was more valuable than surprise. The first wave of human ships, smaller and more agile than the Council's massive war fleets, struck fast and hard. They weren't designed for brute force, but for precision. A series of rapid, calculated strikes hit key targets, disabling enemy ships and turning their surprise attack into a chaotic mess. The attack on Earth wasn't going as planned. In the chaos of the battle, the true scale of humanity's resilience began to show. The human fleets, though smaller in number, fought with a ferocity and strategy that caught the Council completely off guard. They didn't just defend, they fought back with an intensity that sent shockwaves through the invaders. The Council's fleets, expecting a quick victory, found themselves in a brutal, drawn-out battle. What had started as an assault turned into a struggle for survival, as human ships disabled larger, more powerful vessels one by one, using their speed and cunning to outmaneuver the enemies. On the ground, Earth's defense forces were equally prepared. Though humanity had not expected such an intense space battle, they had made preparations for an attack of this scale. Earth cities, once bustling with peaceful activity, now became fortresses. The military had set up barricades, concealed bunkers, and energy shields that made it incredibly difficult for the enemy to land. Even as the alien forces began to deploy ground troops, they were met with fierce resistance from human soldiers who fought with a desperation born from the knowledge that their survival depended on victory. The humans had always been fighters, and now they proved that their resilience was their greatest weapon. As the days passed, the battle for Earth raged on. The Council's forces, though powerful, had begun to lose momentum. What had started as an overwhelming attack had turned into a drawn-out conflict, with neither side gaining a clear upper hand. The Prothar, once thought to be unstoppable, were now facing massive losses. Their fleet was decimated by well-placed human attacks, and their once-feared warships now drifted, crippled, in the void. The Iris, a race known for their telepathic abilities, found themselves caught in a psychological war they hadn't anticipated. Humanity's sheer determination to survive had turned the tides of the battle in ways that the Council's commanders couldn't understand. In the midst of the chaos, an unexpected twist occurred. The Vekari, a species known for their diplomatic ties and vast trade networks, had quietly sided with humanity. The Vekari's involvement had been one of the quietest alliances, but it was also one of the most crucial. As the tide of battle began to shift, the Vekari launched a series of attacks on the Council's supply lines, severely hindering their ability to continue the assault. The Vekari knew the importance of keeping the Council distracted. They were not a military power, but their networks were vast, and their knowledge of galactic logistics was unparalleled. With their help, humanity had found a way to outlast the Council's forces. Despite the setbacks, the Council's leaders refused to acknowledge defeat. But even as they sent reinforcements, it became clear that the galaxy's balance of power was shifting. The Council was no longer in control, and humanity's fierce resistance had sparked something bigger, something the Council had long feared. The spark of rebellion had ignited, and now it was spreading beyond Earth's borders. Across the galaxy, other factions were watching closely. The smaller races who had once been oppressed were now questioning their loyalty to the Council. The sight of humanity fighting back, against all odds, was inspiring them to rise up as well. The storm had broken, and the galaxy was on the brink of something new. Humanity had shown the Council that it was not to be underestimated. The battle for Earth was far from over, but the war for the future of the galaxy had already begun. The Council had thought they could control the galaxy through fear, but humanity had proven that the greatest weapon was not destruction. It was the will to fight for freedom, no matter the cost. The storm was far from finished, and as it raged, it left the Council's future in question. Would they bend, or would they break under the weight of the chaos they had created? Only time would tell. The battle for Earth was far from over, but it was clear that the tide was turning. Humanity had proven itself to be far more than just a nuisance to the Council. It had become a symbol of resistance. The galaxy, once unified under the power of the Council, now stood on the edge of division. While the Council had been quick to strike back at humanity's bold challenge, the cracks in their unity were becoming impossible to ignore. Behind the closed doors of the Council chambers, whispers of dissent began to echo through the vast halls, growing louder with each passing day. The situation on Earth, once thought to be a temporary setback, had become a galvanizing force, causing factions within the Council to question everything they had fought for. The Prothar, once the fiercest supporters of the Council's iron grip over the galaxy, began to waver. Their insectoid minds, hive-driven and ruthless, had never been known for subtlety, but the results of the war were hard to ignore. The once feared Prothar fleets, which had crushed entire worlds in the past, were being decimated by humanity's swift tactics. Their warships, designed for brute force, were no match for the speed and ingenuity of human fighters. The Prothar leadership, in the face of such unexpected losses, found themselves at a crossroads. Their own military might had been undermined by the very species they had underestimated. How could they continue to support a system that had failed them? There was no clear answer, but the first cracks were appearing. Meanwhile, the Iris, the telepathic race that had once held strong to the belief that unity was the only path to peace, found themselves divided. For centuries, they had acted as the diplomats of the Council, their ability to read minds and emotions making them natural mediators. But as they watched the Council's response to humanity's defiance, their own doubts began to grow. The Iris had always believed in unity, but at what cost? The violence, the destruction, the suppression of those who wanted to be free, it was all becoming too much. Some of the Iris leaders began to privately question the Council's methods, suggesting that it was time for a new way. But they were careful, always cautious, knowing that even a hint of rebellion could lead to disastrous consequences. Still, within their own ranks, a quiet resistance was growing. The telepaths were communicating in whispers, using their powers to avoid detection. The seeds of division had been planted. The Zanari, the peaceful race of philosophers who had long advocated for diplomacy, watched with growing concern as the galaxy plunged deeper into chaos. They had never supported the Council's decision to forcibly unite the galaxy under a single banner, but they had remained silent, hoping that peace could be achieved without violence. Now, they found themselves on the edge of a terrible decision. The Zanari knew that humanity had risen not only as a challenger to the Council, but as a beacon of hope for the oppressed. Humanity's refusal to be crushed by the Council's overwhelming might was inspiring other species to stand up and demand more. The Zanari were no longer the silent observers they had once been. They had to act. But would they risk alienating the Council entirely? Their hesitation caused friction among their own ranks, as younger members began to push for a more active role in opposing the Council's growing tyranny. The Zanari, once a voice of reason, were now divided between those who wanted peace at any cost and those who were ready to fight for a new future. It was clear that the unity the Council had once enjoyed was now splintering. The Council, which had held the galaxy in its grip for centuries, was no longer a unified force. The Prathar, the Iris, and the Zanari were no longer speaking with one voice, and without that unified front, the foundation of the Council itself began to shake. Factions that had once been loyal to the Council were now openly questioning its leadership. Some called for the removal of the NRMR, the Council leader, whose long reign had been marked by strength but also by an increasing desire to maintain control at all costs. The NMR had been the symbol of the Council's power, but now even his authority was being called into question. His decisions to crush humanity with such force had backfired, and many of his allies were starting to see the cracks in his leadership. The Council teetered on the edge of collapse. An emergency meeting was called. Representatives from every major faction gathered in the Council chambers, their faces tense, their minds full of uncertainty. The atmosphere was thick with tension. No one knew what would happen next, but one thing was certain: the Council was divided, and the galaxy's future was in question. Would they continue to fight humanity with the same ruthless determination, or would they seek a new path, one that could restore order without further bloodshed? The answers were not clear, but the debates were fierce. Some called for the immediate expulsion of the rebellious factions that had sided with humanity, while others argued that it was time to negotiate, to find a way to coexist. The Prothor and Iris were deeply divided, each faction holding its own opinions on the matter. The Zanari, ever the diplomats, tried to mediate, but their position was becoming increasingly untenable. In the midst of the turmoil, a voice rose from the back of the chamber, a voice that would change everything. It was Marcus Cade, the human representative who had stood firm against the Council's proposal in the first place. He had watched as the galaxy's most powerful species tore itself apart, and he knew that this moment could be humanity's chance to reshape the future. Stepping forward, he addressed the divided Council, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had seen the horrors of war and understood the cost of power. "The galaxy doesn't need more bloodshed," he said, his words cutting through the heated arguments like a blade. "It doesn't need more wars for control. We've shown that we won't be ruled by fear, but we also know that peace cannot be built on a foundation of oppression. If you want to save what's left of this galaxy, it's time to stop fighting and start listening."